Welcome to this discussion today. This one is really a special one, and we haven't had something like this before. Today we're hosting the guests from the Citizens Archive of Pakistan, which does some really important and critical work on preserving history and cultural heritage. And this is something that we've been paying attention to a great deal at the American Pakistan Foundation. Ever since I took on this role as president 3 years ago, I've discovered that there's a great deep interest in the diaspora, in particular in the second generation, to learn more about their cultural heritage as their families set up more roots in the United States. And then as well, in the first generation that left Pakistan, there's also an equally deep interest to preserve their own stories and experiences. And so it's incredible to see such great work being done out of Pakistan and also with a focus on the diaspora. We appreciate that. I am going to hand it over to my colleague, Noah Osman, who is part of the American Pakistan Foundation as a research fellow and has been a blog writer for us and has written many of our pieces on cultural heritage and cultural preservation. So Noah, I'm going to turn it over to you to begin the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Shamaila. And thank you everyone who came. It's very exciting to be presenting this webinar. So yeah, my name is Noah Usman. I'm a member of the Leadership Council Steering Committee and Regional Ambassador for the West Coast. And today we'll be discussing the history and activity of the Citizens Archive of Pakistan. And the panelists joining me today are Alia Taibi, Senior Project Manager at the Citizens Archive of Pakistan, and Mariam As-Sakafi, the chair of the North American chapter. And I could go into greater detail on what they've done, but if you both would like to also introduce yourselves.
Go ahead, Alia.
Okay, so thank you so much for that introduction, Noha. Hi, everybody. My name is Alia Taibi. I'm joining you from Karachi. Super excited to have this conversation. Before we start, there's a little video about our organization, which we feel will give you an opening into the kind of work that we do and will help aid us as we tell you our story.
Alia, there's no sound to the video. Sound to the video. Sorry, Alia, there's no sound to the video.
या यहाँ रह रहे थे या यहाँ आए थे और उन्हीं लोगों के घरों से संदूकों में जो पुरानी तस्वीरें थी वो हमने डिजिटाइज की जो हमारी यहाँ लाइब्रेरीज हैं उनमें हमने जाकर पुराने अखबार थे उनको डिजिटाइज करना शुरू किया और इस तरह हमारी आहिस्ता आहिस्ता आर्काइव बनना शुरू हो गई ओरल हिस्ट्री बहुत ज़रूरी है हमारी कम्युनिटी के लिए पाकिस्तान में जितने भी लोग रह रहे हैं हम सबकी कहानियाँ मिलकर एक बड़ी कहानी बनाती है
छोटी चीजें होती हैं, आपकी दावतों में क्या पकता था, तफरीह के लिए लोग कहाँ निकलते थे, कौन से मूवीज मशहूर थे, गाने कौन से गाए जाते थे, ये भी बहुत जरूरी है। ये जो आर्काइव है ये प्रेजेंट डे जनरेशन के लिए सिर्फ नहीं है, ये जनरेशंस टू कम के लिए है।
This museum gives an opportunity for families to actually go out and learn about the history of Pakistan. It's a completely immersive experience, and it's about people's personal stories, about their personal struggles, which have never been shared before.
जो हमारे पार्टीशन के लिए लोगों ने जद्दोजहद की, किस लेवल पे जद्दोजहद की, जब आप ये कहानियां सुनते हैं और उनकी ज़बानी सुनते हैं तो आपको रियलाइज होता है कि कितनी मुश्किलात से उन्होंने पाकिस्तान बनाया। जब आपको पता लगता है इतनी मुश्किलात से पाकिस्तान बनाया, तो हमने पाकिस्तान को संभालना है, और सिर्फ हमने पाकिस्तान को संभालना नहीं, हमने पाकिस्तान को आगे बढ़ाना। तो ये सारी चीजें पुरानी कहानियों को सुन के, देख के हमें और इंस्पिरेशन मिलती है आगे बढ़ने के लिए।
Wonderful. Thank you. If that's okay, I'll just give a quick introduction. I'm Mariam Al-Sakafi. I'm based out of Chicago. I've been very, very privileged to have worked with a lot of the people that you see in that video for a very long time on CAP. And I think the one little thing that I'll just sort of plug in that we may have missed at the beginning of that video is that CAP was founded by a group of 20-year-olds. In 2007, and this group of 20-year-olds basically looked around and said, we just have not learned enough or appreciated enough the hard work that the founders of Pakistan had put in, the sacrifices that people had made, the importance of young people, especially in a nation that is predominantly illiterate at the end of the day. How do we delve into that history? How do we teach citizenship? How do we instill pride so that we can move forward? And so really for the young people on this call, it was an exercise where we were saying, look, we're not sure whether existing institutions work for us. We're going to set up something. And this is pre-NFTs, this is pre-metaverse, this is, people saying, look, let's just digitize these experiences so we can then share them. And the big dream at the time was a living, breathing museum. We were going the other way. We were starting from the digital and then going to the bricks and mortar. But really this whole idea, this mission started when we looked around us and saw extremism and apathy and lack of opportunity, and certainly a lack of pride in what Pakistan is. So I'm so glad we get to share this video with you.
Just taking on from where Mariam starts, I joined CAP in 2014, and I have a background in anthropology, and I've always been very interested in not just understanding how we live, but why we live. So societal norms and how they shape our consciousness. And what I realized when I joined CAP and I started working for the Oral History Project was that there are very few nations in this world who can have access to their first citizens. And these are people with individual memories of what it was to build a nation, to start afresh, to start with nothing and then take it forward, to live through strife and hardships and build from there. I mean, I remember going to people and asking them to share with us their stories. And some of my favorite stories that I think are worth mentioning are, I remember this lady that I went to interview. She had been part of the rehabilitation at the refugee camps, and one of the largest refugee camps at the time of partition in 1947 was at Walton in Lahore. And this woman at that time was a young girl, and she said, okay, me and my sisters, we were already living in Lahore, and large number of migrants were coming in. And as they were coming in, the resources were very few. August is the monsoon season in Pakistan. That year, Pakistan experienced one of the most intense monsoons, which created mass flooding, which resulted in the outbreak of cholera. And because of the cholera and the conditions at the refugee camps, a lot of people were dying. And when I remember, I had read about partition, it was just numbers, figures, facts, and there was no personality to it. There was no narrative that resonated with me as an individual, which made me think that this was more than just a story on a piece of paper. And I remember that by listening to this lady's story of how she recollected was my first experience of understanding that history is much more than documents. And it is much more than just a retell of high politics. History is much more holistic. It is much more nuanced than we give it credit. And it has so many strata, so many different substrands that emerge from it. And we get to those substrands when we look at history through people's perspectives. And in that particular angle, I think CAP was unique and still is, because no one in Pakistan is doing it. When we started in 2007, very few people even understood what it was. I remember going to people and they would be like, what are you doing again? What are you going to do with it again? And I remember these old people really not caring. And because we were tapping into senior citizens, just the fact that they had somebody to come and speak with for them was a treat in itself. So we were very, very fortunate to be able to have these moments with them. And looking at the world mortality rate, we are sitting in 2022 today. And according to world mortality rate, most of the people who had witnessed partition or were in an age where they would have been able to have certain memories would not have been with us by 2020. So time was against us when we started this project, because in 2007, when we start, we just literally have 13 years to tap into maximum number of individuals. And like Mariam explained in the beginning, when we started, it started with the story of CAP, I think, is one of the most cute stories that one can come across. And it is that a group of 20-something Karachiites get together at dinner and they start talking about history. And they start talking about how their history that they're hearing from their elders is very different from the history that they're reading. And why is that? Like, our grandparents are telling us something very different from the stuff that we are being taught in school. And what is it that makes our grandparents' stories so much more us, whereas the stuff that we read in the books in school is alien? That is the question that these folks had. With that question in mind, they all dispersed and decided, but before they did disperse, they decided that they're gonna do something about it. And on a single desk in a go down at one of the members sitting there, they decided to get a group of volunteers who would go out and record oral narratives. At that time, all they knew was that they were questions. And that is how we started, without a structure, without a standard operating procedure, without an idea of how we're going to grow. But we realized that there was beauty to the orality of tradition. There was beauty to the memories of people, and using that as a medium, we kept on growing. So the Oral History Project at CAP is a collection of people's stories from all walks of life. We do not differentiate between a person who was a key player in the government of Pakistan or a top bureaucrat to a person who is at home and a homemaker, because we believe that both of them saw events, incidents that are reflective of the country and our stories. And South Asia, by and large, is a very oral tradition. We believe in the orality of our education. And as a tool, if you look at the region before the Hunters Commission, we have been, largely focusing on orality. So we are more attuned to that as individuals and using that as a tool to connect not just with the elders, but with the younger generation is what makes our project truly unique.
Thank you. And so thank you both of you for introducing yourselves and for going over the origins of CAP. I just wanted to take a moment to let everyone know that if you have questions for the panelists, then you're welcome to submit them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end of the webinar. And Alia, I just wanted to say that the philosophy that you explained for CAP, it reminded me of a quote from museum curator Ariana Curtis that the extraordinary by definition is unrepresentative. So in order to get a truly representative picture of what happens in a country's history, you need to take a look at people from all socioeconomic classes, backgrounds. And so, yes, thank you both of you for going over the initial goals of CAP. I'll direct this next question to Mariam. I was wondering if you could go into greater detail on how this project was initially received by the surrounding community and what initial challenges the organization faced. We're not receiving audio.
My apologies. After 2 years, one would think I figured this out. Noah, you know, there are many challenges, some of which I think remain to this day, which we could begin with scarcity of resources. As Alia mentioned, you know, this idea that we were starting out knowing simply what we wanted to accomplish, not very clearly how we were going to go about it. And, you know, the mission of democratizing access to history is a very large mission. And it requires a great deal of resources, a great deal of buy-in. The fact remained that of that group of 20-something-year-olds that started, the vast majority of us had studied abroad, had in America. That we can develop best practices was very dear to our hearts. The idea that we could leverage connection minded people, not just in Pakistan, but in the region. You know, we ran some of the most innovative and groundbreaking partnerships with India at a time when governments weren't coordinating with each other. So we were really driven by the notion that there are people globally who recognize that history is important, that history is in some way sacred, and that we were not replacing, this was the real wrinkle, which is explaining to people that if your mission in life is primary education or secondary education or poverty alleviation, that what CAP is trying to achieve is not in competition to what you're doing, but simply a part of what we're trying to do, which is build a society that is robust, a society with citizens that are engaged, young people and young children that understand what it means to be responsible and a part of a community, are all very universal and work hand in hand. So really getting past that mental barrier was critical. I think we operated again by virtue of our experiences as a lean startup, which meant we were nimble, we were all committed to the goal, we were very strategic, and we weren't afraid of thinking big. And that, I think, has really contributed to making this happen. I will tell you what I want to highlight very clearly is that we were, even though we knew we didn't know how to do something, we wanted to develop those best practices. So when Alia speaks of the Oral History Project, for years, we partnered with StoryCorps, which you may be familiar with in America, which is at the forefront. It's an organization at the forefront of collecting oral histories. And we have been so lucky to have trained with them, trained for them, trained our own people. And, one of our goals, for example, in the future is that in the same way that people have YouTube or TikTok, we would like people to be able to upload their own oral histories. Right now, Alia and her team field, hundreds of requests for interviews, but how about we make you or anyone on this call an archivist? So we were really focused on building an organization that outlives all of us.
Thank you. And Alia, I was wondering if I could ask you about, in greater detail, about the Oral History Project and about the process that goes into not only choosing an archivist. I know that the organization is trying to expand the range of archivists, but how the interview is conducted and how it's published and how the data is used to educate the public.
Okay, so the way we conduct oral history is like when we started in 2007. At that time, our primary goal was to tap into the first generation of citizens, and we were completely focused on partition and the early years of Pakistan. We were going and speaking to people from all walks of life who had been a witness to partition, either as migrants or either as experiencing migration at a large scale taking place around them and how their spaces were changing. So I'm not just talking about a political movement, but also talking about a sociological movement that is shaping their new reality. So we started with, and the idea was very simple, that anyone who was born in the region from the 1920s, 1930s was a primary candidate. And and I think one of, like, again, I cannot emphasize enough on the beauty of individual desire to do something and how with the minimum of resources you can make magic, right? And that's what we did. So when we started with what I call the ripple effect, which is that I came home and I asked my grandparents and my parents who are from that generation to tell me their stories. And then I said, okay, now connect me to your friends, to your contacts. The only criteria being that they were born in this region at around this time and have memories. We will go and we will speak to them. Now, so one thing about orality and memories is that, whereas sound is magic, because you know what is the beauty of sound? When I tell you a story, I tell you a story of a person that whose story I had heard. So I will lose a lot of detail that might not be relevant to the story that I'm trying to tell you, because I'm so focused on what the end product is. But if I were to let it organically reveal itself, I will be sharing a lot of details, right? So the first-hand narrative and the value of first-hand narrative is much more higher because of that particular reason. Now, the other thing is, so we started off by that. The idea was very simple: go and speak to people who remember partition and the early years. But what we also realized as we were going in is that we South Asians are amazing hoarders, right? So everybody had trunks and suitcases filled with objects. These objects were photographs, newspapers, wrapping papers, you know, some candy from childhood, these little boxes, and a lot of material that was reminiscent of a society, of a culture, of a lifestyle. We started documenting these things as well. We started photographing them, we started scanning them and digitizing them. And I'll tell you one of the cutest things that happened. So I remember I had gone to this gentleman's house and we were collecting his narrative, and he had a portrait of his grandfather hanging, and it was a beautiful photograph. And his grandfather wasn't anyone really famous, but he was dressed to the nines in traditional Gujarati dress from the early 19th century in South Asia. And for us, that was brilliant. So we said, Kisa, would you be okay if we want to digitize this? He was like, sure, of course. Karlo, beta. And we said, okay, fine. So when we unframed that photograph, we found an 1886 newspaper daily, which had been used as a base to create foaming for the frame. And that paper was completely intact. So oftentimes there are hidden gems that come your way. And so like what I'm trying to basically explain is that the treasure trove of history is oftentimes with people. And it is only by tapping into these individuals and into these resources that we're able to come out with things which otherwise would get lost. And one of the reasons why we truly believe that the Oral History Project is not only unique, but really, really integral to the growth of Pakistan. Because yes, it has been 75 years to Pakistan's birth, but if you look at it from a historical perspective, 75 years is nothing in a country's history. It's a baby. it does look like, oh, geez, 75 years, but it's nothing, right? So very few countries in the world, again, would have access or would be able to say, yes, we have actual sound recordings of the first generation, of how they came, how they lived, what they saw, how they saw things building up, and what they sacrificed, right? So it is not a literature or a biography, it's an actual story from the horse's mouth. So it's a completely different ballgame. And so oral histories have that unique selling point, which I feel makes stories, and these stories make realities our realities. And the way it works is, like, when we go and we interview people, the interviewer has the power to pull us into their lives. So we are not just sitting there and taking notes, we are actually traveling back in time with them. And we are becoming, through their words, their eyes, their sense of smell. Like, oftentimes I remember, like, I interviewed this lady and she told me, okay, when I close my eyes, I can smell the rain in Hyderabad, Dakar. I can smell the matti that would be permeated in the air, because that was home. And that smell is very different from the smell of coastal areas in Karachi, where she resides, because Hyderabad Dakkan is more of a hilly plains in the Punjab as compared to Sindh, which is coastal. But memories are able to not only capture imagery, but are able to capture all senses. And these memories have that power to take you back in time. So, like, I remember when we curated our National History Museum and the Greater Iqbal Park in Lahore, we were looking at these memories and we realized that we wanted to be the people who created something for our people in Pakistan to own, to be proud of, because we as Pakistanis were very, very unaware of the rich data that created our reality. We were very unaware of the trauma that we had gone through, the power of starting from scratch. We have done it before and we just get lost oftentimes. But again, like I said, the power of stories, it still has this magic to resonate with each and every one of us. And, I remember I went to interview this gentleman, and his father was Agha Muhammad Bakir, who had broadcasted the announcement of the dawn of freedom at Radio Pakistan in August 1947, right? So on the dawn of independence at between 13th and 14th August, his father had made the announcement, and he, as a little boy, was sitting in that studio while his father made that announcement. And 70 odd years later, he sits there and verbatim explains to me what it is. And the original was done in English, and his father immediately translated it. And his father made the broadcast in Urdu, and it goes as Subhe Tuluhe Azadi. And even when I'm explaining that to you, I get overwhelmed, right? And I am retelling the story and I get overwhelmed. Imagine being in that space while it is happening. Now imagine taking that little audio clip and putting it in an audio device or up on social media for everybody to engage with. Now we have done something which is very unique for Pakistan, which is we have taken history from people's homes and people's memories and made it come alive. And that is what we try to focus on as we take our stories to people. And that is the true essence of the work that we do. On that note, I have this really beautiful video of migration and resettlement of this gentleman that we had the pleasure of interviewing. His name is Shafiq Inia, and his story is a tale of what is taking place in August 1947 as people are coming to new lands where they know no one. and what is the process and how it is all unfolding, which is very different from 7.1 or 15 million people walking across the borders, because that is the footnote in history that is given to us for the same process. And I'm going to explain it in a slightly different way. And I realized you had some issues with audio before. So before I play it, I apologize, but I'm going to just ask if you can hear me properly before if you hear the video properly before I plug it in, because I'd really like you to have a full listen.
This audio has been taken from the Citizens Archive of Pakistan's Oral History Project.
लाहौर में हम आगे हुए थे 42 के बाद। कांटेक्ट मेरा कसूर और लाहौर दोनों से था। तो मुझे जब पता चला कि काफिला आ रहा है और वो वाया फिरोजपुर आ रहा है, लाहौर से मैं आता था तो नेचुरली पता चलता था कि बहुत महाजिर आए हुए हैं। पैदल ही चलते थे लाहौर, गाड़ियाँ वाले कहाँ थे उस समय जब ये लोग आते थे। सतलुज के किनारे जो बड़ा शहर है वो फिरोजपुर, यहाँ पर परेड ग्राउंड बहुत बड़ी खुली जगह थी और कसूर बिल्कुल इसके पास। उनको पता ही नहीं था कि पाकिस्तान कहाँ है। वो आते थे तो पूछते थे जी मार मार के कहा है कि पाकिस्तान जाओ। अब हमें पता नहीं, हम आ गए हैं, हमें बताएं जी पाकिस्तान कहाँ है। तो हमने उनको कहते थे कि ये पाकिस्तान है, शुक्र करो खुदा का तुम आ गए हो। और इसमें बीमार बच्चे, लेडीज, बूढ़ी आदमी, लोग बूढ़े जवान, अब इनको खाना देना, हर फैमिली के कितने मेंबर हैं नोट करते थे और फिर हर मेंबर को 2 रोटी और इतना सा गोल, सालन तो होता नहीं। रोजों के दिन थे और बारिश शुरू हुई तो कॉलरे की डेथ भी हो गई। खोजने वाले कहाँ से लाए छोटी सी जगह, तो उन्होंने कहा भी ऐसा करते हैं जिनकी किसी की डेथ हो वो खुद ही कब्र खोद के अपने जो भी इसकी डेथ हुई उसको दफन कर। आज औकात ये होता था उनसे हो नहीं रहा कब्र खोदना तो उसको डाल देते थे उधर। उनको ये नहीं बताना पड़ता था कि किसका है कौन है। तो एक तो उनका 2 रोटी कम नहीं होती थी तो वो बताते नहीं। आप अंदाजा नहीं कर सकते, बहुत बुरी हालत में थी।
Thank you for playing that video. I think it demonstrates firsthand the power that we felt hearing that story. And it's very interesting and inspiring to hear how organic the process of growth was for CAP, not just in how you all have recruited people, but in how the aims of the organization have expanded once you realize the ability to collect so many different media and forms of information. I'm going to direct, and I noticed there's a question in the chat regarding the video being reshared on social media. We will be publishing a blog post shortly, and we will be including those videos for you to reshare from there. And I just want to put in a reminder that if you have any questions, you're welcome to enter them into the chat and we'll get to them at the end of the webinar. So I wanted to turn the focus a little bit from the people who are contributing information to the people who are experiencing the information as we just did. And so I'll direct this next question to Mariam, but obviously you both are welcome to answer. I was wondering if you could discuss some of the other exhibits that have been put out by CAP, including the mobile museums and outreach tours. I'm curious to discuss how people have reacted to these exhibits and the experiences that they've gained from the work done by CAP.
Absolutely. We realized very early on that the value in what Alia and her team are doing and the Oral History Project is really only as good as how many people we can reach and touch. And I think, you know, the nuance there that I do want to emphasize that is critical is that when we were going out and collecting stories, we wanted to make sure that they were truly representative. I cannot stress this enough. So whether it was communities, religious minorities, you know, whatever dimension you slice it in, we wanted to make sure that the unheard stories were being heard and that you didn't have to be from the middle class or the upper middle class. We wanted to make sure that even the children in the slums of Karachi could access this history. We're all shared citizens. So that's the first aspect of it. The second aspect of it was this realization that, of course, archives have existed since the birth of Pakistan. They just happen to be in the basement of some dusty museum where they're crumbling and nobody's able to reach them. So how do we create programming that really reaches out to people? At the beginning, it started with festivals. So you would have something called the Shanakht Festival. And you know, we were very deliberate in planning whatever our stalls would be or whatever our exhibits would be, to make sure that a child who went to, you know, the Karachi grammar school could come there, as well as a child who had never been to school, right? The idea was, you know, could an illiterate adult get the same educational value, put in their photo and get a first passport of Pakistan as somebody who has traveled the world with, you know, multiple passports. So we were always very deliberate in that thought process. We also had, you know, we've talked about the race against time with older generations passing away and the original perspectives being lost, but we had another timeline, and that timeline was, we were seeing, especially in Karachi at the time, massive amounts of unrest. We were seeing, you know, we talk about extremism, we talk about, you know, parts of society that really were disenfranchised. And the goal here was to reach out to educational institutions and public schools and try and work adjacent to government schools or to what TCF may have or what HDF may have, and really come up with after-school programming that worked around principles that those of us who live in America take for granted, whether it is gender equity, whether it is religious tolerance, whether it is, you know, an appreciation for diversity. And so we started building programming materials that were the basis of what we call our school outreach tours. At the same time, we realized you would go into these schools and you would ask these children what our problems are. And they would not say the economy or clean water or the climate or environment. They would say India. India's our biggest problem. America's our other big problem. And we realized that to really move forward, we need exchange programs. And this was, and we could have an entire session just on it. Alia will agree, I know she's smiling. But we ran exchange for change programs between the USA and Pakistan and India and Pakistan with thousands of children. And they were run at a very basic, how do we engage with each other? How do we appreciate the humanity of each other? And how do we move forward recognizing that we cannot live a world in which we keep demonizing both our neighbors and the world at large? So we really started from our school outreach tours. We started with Exchange for Change. We started doing mobile tours where, you know, even now we have these vans that take films that educate children on, or adults, by the way. We call it our museum on wheels, and they go into rural areas in the Punjab, in Sindh, wherever we really can get anybody to go, aside from the fact that, of course, we have the crown jewel of our aside from the Oral History Project, which is the National History Museum. And the National History Museum, Noah, when you ask about our successes, is, it's one of those experiences where people will come from villages who have never been to a museum before and come in and experience exhibits that make you feel that you are standing by a railway track at the time of partition. You can see and smell and feel. And for those of you in America who watched Miss Marvel and who saw that incredible depiction of partition, the materials for that came from the CAP archive. Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy, who is one of the directors for those episodes, is the patron-in-chief and is one of the driving forces behind this, behind CAP. And so, we were always conscious of the fact that our testimonies and our histories are only as useful as how creative we are and how broadly we can reach out to audiences. By the way, equally in North America, equally in India, we wanted to be leaders in the region, if not the world. So I hope that answers your question, Noah.
Yes, thank you very much for going into detail on that. I'll direct the same question to Alia regarding the exhibits. What kinds of reactions have you observed from members of communities, both rural and urban, and across different backgrounds?
So we do a lot of exhibitions. Some of them are permanent, some of them are temporary. Our permanent exhibition is the National History Museum, which has a brilliant footfall. The government of Punjab has made it mandatory for schools under the Punjab government to visit these spaces. So we have a lot of children coming in. Now, the way the museum is curated is that it uses a lot of interactive, immersive experiences. It uses a lot of oral histories and a lot of photographs and a lot of recreations for people to literally go in. And that was the idea, right? So we started off with 1940 Pakistan Resolution as our starting point for the story. And we took it from there. So you start with the Pakistan Resolution, you go into a timeline of history from 1940 to 1960. This is high politics. Then you come into the section where there are Gandhi Jinnah talks. So this is conversation taking place, and there's these letters and photographs that you can again experience. Then you go forward and you come into the 47 space where you have a recreation of a refugee camp. Then you have these audio videos that you see. And then there is a space which we call the Kamra Fasadat, which is basically the experience of violence that was incurred across both sides of the border. But what was that experience like? What did it as an individual do for you? What did it make you feel? So there's a space where you are supposed to feel uncomfortable because of the light and sound show that we put there, right? Now, so we have people who come from high dignitaries, bureaucrats, the president visited it, all the ambassadors who come to Pakistan visit it. And so it's become like this really like one-stop shop for everybody. And the beauty is that every person who visits it, when they go back, takes something uniquely their own from it, whether it be a story that resonated with them, whether it be an experience, whether it be an object. And that is truly what makes this permanent exhibition of ours unique. Having said that, CAP has done numerous semi-permanent exhibitions, which include Shanaf and which include Kissa Fani Bazaar. These are all actual recreation of spaces and we call them safe spaces for conversations which we truly believe need to take place. One of the reasons that even after 75 years, India and Pakistan are still not able to make peace with each other is because we have not actually made peace with ourselves. We have not actually taken ownership of what happened to us. We have never, ever gone out and acknowledged that there is a wound and this wound needs to heal. And because we have never acknowledged that there is a wound, that wound has gotten gangrene now, and we are thinking of amputations, right? Because we're constantly thinking of cutting off ties and like hating on each other. It feeds the current climate of politics, but it does not feed into the context of human consciousness. There is a discord here, and that discord is something that's at the heart of everything that CAP tries to do. We try to humanize ourselves because I think somewhere along the lines we have lost our humanity. That is why soft history, as it is called, orality of history, is becoming something of a fad. It's not a fad, it's a reality. Unless we take ownership of history as it is experienced by individuals who have no say in it, who are pretty powerless. I'll tell you something, we go and we speak to people. A lot of people who speak to us tell us that, yes, it was a conscious decision that they made to migrate. It was a decision that they took, but how they migrated was often taken out of their hands. They had to migrate in the middle of the night because suddenly it was unsafe to be in a neighborhood where they had been living for hundreds of years. Can you, as an individual sitting in the United States in a really secure space, ever even think that this could happen to you? So we have those difficult conversations in our semi-permanent exhibitions, in the conversations that we put together, in the sessions that we have. And what we also do is a lot of exhibitions which raise the same questions. Our idea through the project and everything that we do is not to be reaching a particular direction, but to be opening up avenues for probabilities and possibilities. An archive and history in itself is basically a tool for you to understand what happened. It is not and must not be used as a tool to create some sort of, some sort of ownership for an agenda, because that is what generally takes place. We take snippets of historical events and use it to propagate whatever agenda we want to push. We are trying to create awareness that history is not in isolation. Because, one of my favorite questions to ask is when I go and I speak to people, especially people who remember violence of partition, is that this happened to us, the Sikhs and the Hindus did this to us, Muslims, and we were like, made so vulnerable. And I asked them that, was it only happening to the Muslims? And that is my aha moment, because oftentimes I see like a bulb lighting up in their memory and they're like, beta, no, actually, we lived in Muslim neighborhoods. So this is what we saw, but we heard that Muslims were doing something similar. The minute that they say that we were also doing something like that, now that them has suddenly become a we. So when you bring in that join that has been missing, I think we can look towards healing and a way forward. And that is what we try to do through everything. There are two things that are at the core of everything that we do: nation building and identity. That's it.
Thank you for going into detail on that. I do have another question before we get to answering the questions from our audience members. This is, after all, a webinar for the American Pakistan Foundation, and I'm sure that after hearing about all the wonderful work that you all are doing, I think many of us in the Pakistani American community are curious to hear what we can do to help contribute to fulfilling the CAP mission. So I'll open it up to both of you to answer. What are the greatest goals and needs for CAP in the near future, and what can we do?
Sure. So, the beauty I have found for CAP is, just as a side note, CAP is a fully tax-exempt registered charity in North America. So, contributions are easy to do. They should be very easy to do. CAP has been very nimble in that we will, some of our best ideas have come from people ringing us up and saying, this is what I would like to do, or this is what I was thinking. My child goes to this school. I'd love to set up an exchange program. We've had calls from people saying, can I sponsor such and such number of oral histories? The short answer to your question, Noah, is we would, we of course deal with a shortage of resources. Monetary funding, in-kind contributions, all of those go a long way. But to us, anything is beneficial, whether it is here, could you please interview my grandfather or call somebody or set up an oral history, interview with them. It is something as simple as installing Amazon Smile and contributing X% of your Amazon purchases to Citizens Archive. It is something as simple as saying, I sit on the board of a non-profit organization, a cultural institute, maybe there's something there. We take any and all leads, we take them incredibly seriously, and we try and come up with programming that fulfills this mission. So the short answer is, anything that you're thinking is helpful to us. In the early days, I remember calling up, we had a very early partnership with Google Arts and Culture, which is still virtual. They helped us a tremendous amount, and I would encourage people to go on their page. But at the very beginning, we had technological questions. How do we train our staff? How do we connect them to educational institutes? How do we build, and Alia will speak to this in more detail, but how do we also train our teams to be the best archivists or the best filmmakers or documentarians? So I'm going to let Alia deal with those very specific resource-driven needs. But the short answer is, we will take any help we can get. And we, this is our shared history. We're all in this together. So we're only as good as the communities that support us.
Alia, would you like to respond?
Just building on to what Mariam said, there are 3 tiers in which you can help us. First and foremost, if you know anyone who is of Pakistani origin and has a story to tell, whether they be living in across anywhere in the world or in Pakistan, we would love to interview them. And so that is one. The other is, like, we are on social media. We have a presence in the virtual world. You can go there and spread the word. That is really helpful too. The third and the most important is building of capacity building for the individuals who work with us. We are self-trained. I'm an anthropologist, not an archivist, but or an oral historian for that matter. Everything that I've learned on the field, and I've learned it because I was interested. So I've been reading up on it, and every practice that has been done through sheer hard work of every individual that has worked. But what would be lovely is if we could get trained in these fields. Unfortunately, in Pakistan, there is no institution which teaches archiving, oral histories, or for that matter, how to preserve, right? So there is nowhere that we can actually go to get trained, but it would be really, really beneficial for us to learn and use those practices for our organization, and then train further organizations within Pakistan who are interested in similar work, because there are lots of people we know who would be interested in this. So to build this archiving and digitizing and cataloging system. Another thing is that we have currently approximately 4,000 hours of recording and roughly 500,000 set of digital images. And these are all our own hard work and collection. And all of this is tabulated into metadata, but we need to figure out a system to take this live, which has been our dream, that we publish all our work for people to access like a digital library. And we need to figure out how to do that, because it is, number one, a very expensive venture, and number two, cannot be done without serious institutional partnerships and proper source of funding. So if this is something that the APF would take on, I think it would be a contribution not just to an organization, but to the welfare of an institution within Pakistan.
Thank you so much. We just received a question regarding near future projects or immediate projects. Mariam, I know that you wanted to speak to the Story Share Initiative, which is a project operating in the United States, if you would like to elaborate on that.
Of course. The question of future projects, I think very quickly though, precisely what Alia mentioned, which is building out our technological infrastructure it's mission critical, we believe. One example would be, in the future, we hope somebody would be able to log on and say, look, here is on a map, according to a timeline, you can see when somebody came to Pakistan, where they moved, sort of when that happened. And so scholars, academics, students, children, people would be able to access it. So technological infrastructure is our dream project that we're all trying to support and build out. But I think our most recent projects that I'd like to really point out are twofold. One was the book clubs across borders, which was run and connecting 12 cities in Pakistan with Afghanistan, running book clubs. And that was tremendous. Unfortunately, with the turn of events, that had to be ended prematurely, but it was immensely valuable for all the participants. But the project that really has been most impactful in the recent past, which we would love to sort of rebirth in the future, was the Story Share Initiative. And the Story Share Initiative was partly funded by the US government, although it required hours upon hours of volunteer time and people putting their resources in, but it basically connected Pakistan and college students and school students with Americans. And it was American schools, it was American experts, it was connecting American students with Pakistani experts. And then we put in another layer. So what we connected was South Africa, and we connected Germany, and we had programming with, Bangladesh. And it really was so meaningful because what we did was twofold. One was we made people relate to each other at a person-to-person level, which goes to that humanizing aspect that Alia speaks of. But the second thing that we did, which was very significant, is so often we think of best practices going only from the West to the East. What we created was a level playing field, which meant that you could have somebody sit in the Government College Lahore and address a class of students in America and be equally well received as somebody who ran an all-female improv group in Chicago, working with an all-female improv group in Karachi. And we really pushed the boundaries of what society means. It isn't just education. It isn't just schools. It's how we live. It's, can I start a business as a woman? What do I do if I want to go into human rights law? And so we really try to think about who we are and what we need. I'm going to bother Noah to play a minute-long video, if that's okay, Noah, I believe, or Alia, are you able to do this for Story Share? Just to give you a quick sense of what is achievable when we just think a little bit outside of the box. So to that end, to these participants, to anyone who may see this video later, whatever ideas you have, please reach out to Alia or myself. It's a pleasure to think through this.
I think one thing that I'll talk about more later is this across my career, always finding people who were trying to solve similar problems and finding ways to work together.
So I would just say for those of you who are doing journalism, you actually, if you want to write for the rest of the world or English-speaking newspapers that aren't based in Pakistan, you actually have a huge advantage, which is where you're sitting.
Art is the thing in which you have tons of freedom. You can create anything, whatever you want.
Thank you so much for playing that. I just want to say I really appreciate both of you and taking the time to answer these questions. And I'd like to just ask a couple of questions from the audience members. We have a question from Zia Mohammed asking who the best contact is for submitting the names of people who might be candidates for oral history interviews.
Okay, thank you so much for that question and for showing interest in being a part of our journey. You could write to us at thecitizensarchive@gmail.com with your nominations, and we can take it from there. If it would be more comfortable, and Noah, if you're okay with that, we could share our personal email addresses with you as well, which you could put up at the portal or wherever for people to access. We are very good with communication. Email works brilliant. We respond generally within 24 hours. I don't think we ever not respond. So I think that is the easiest way of getting in touch with us. And yeah.
Thank you. And we have another question from Rizwan Kareem. How can a community organization intending to work on its oral history project with a base in Pakistan benefit from CAP's experience?
So I think Mariam also talked about this in the beginning, but just elaborate. CAP not only looks at large historical context from a regional perspective, but we look at micro level organizational institutions and oral history archives, which means that we tap into smaller communities like the Dawoodi Bohra, the Ismailis, the Sikhs, the Parsi community, and we have specialized projects where we go and we tap into their stories from their angles. We create specific questionnaires that feed into the information that we're looking at, and we work backwards. We try to look at the kind of information which would benefit the community itself. Again, using the tools of action anthropology, applying community and community needs to generate a questionnaire, and then using that questionnaire to tap into the community is how we do it. We are not only an archive, but we're also a repository. So if individual communities want to go and record their own oral histories, they can do so. And we can act as a repository for them. But because oral histories are very specific to the quality of sound, I personally prefer if we were to go and interview these, because we have equipment which is able to capture good quality sound. And the idea is to create an archive not for 5 years or 10 years, but hopefully for 500 to 1,000 years. So sound is important. I mean, any archive that works is working with the idea that it's going to exist for centuries, you know? Yeah, so that's how it is. So again, if they like, they can reach out to us and we can see what are the probabilities that we can work on. Within Pakistan, we have worked with different organizations to create their institutional archives, to create their institutional oral history projects, and to also create mini museum spaces for their community engagement. So all of those are possible as long as they're interested and their funds available.
Thank you so much for going over that. And to the most recent question, we will be sharing the contact information at a later point. If the two of you would like to enter your contact information into the chat, you're welcome to. But otherwise, I just wanted to say again, thank you so much. I appreciate the time from both of you. And to the audience members, I really hope you enjoyed learning about the wealth of data that CAP is collecting and the interesting ways in which they're trying to spread information to the public and help us as Pakistanis and members of the diaspora gain a greater understanding of our history. So yes, thank you again. And thank you to everyone who has attended. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was our pleasure.